Okay. Well, I will just start with a brief introduction. I'm Jen Tozer. I'm the executive director of a foundation building strength. Our mission is to find treatments for Nemaline myopathy, and we are on a steadfast path towards finding treatments, but we understand that this takes a long time. And we want to be able to bring resources to the Nemaline myopathy community sooner now while we are determined to find those treatments. And so we've developed a webinar series to offer resources about care and life with NM that will hopefully be very supportive to everybody that's attending this webinar and beyond, to bring information, resources, and improved care for Nemaline myopathy. And so today, based on community feedback, we have developed a webinar focused on respiratory care and respiratory therapy devices. And I'm thrilled to have Chris Burgess here, who will be as respiratory therapist and will be able to share some really helpful resources as we all know that respiratory devices have been changing over time. And so we want to bring to you the latest in the technology and changes and be able to answer questions about that that are specific to you. Chris will be talking about portable mechanical ventilation, oscillating secretion mobilization, and mechanical insufflation, exsufflation. And within each of those topics, he will talk about those, and then we'll offer a Q&A where you can ask questions. So you can either use the chat feature if you don't want to go off mute, but you're also welcome to just ask your question. This is a small enough group where we can have a great interaction and be able to ask anything that would be helpful to you. So on that note, I'm going to pass it over to Chris.
Well, thanks for having me. I enjoy doing this stuff, believe it or not. I like helping people understand, what their options are and maybe even a deeper understanding of what's going on with them. I know the medical community as a whole is not terribly adept at treating patients with various neuromuscular conditions from a respiratory perspective. I've had many frustrating arguments with practitioners in the hospitals when I've gone to see my patients and asking them why, what are you doing? Why are you doing that? Doesn't make sense. And, it's a pain point that we all have when we deal with, some of the less common diseases and disorders, and happy to help. So I've been a respiratory therapist for 35 years or so now. I work now primarily in the home care world for long-term care. I do have a background in pediatrics and acute critical care, cardiology, all of that, but been out here in the home care world doing long-term management now for 26 years. So, hopefully I can help you out. And I guess let me share my screen. Let me move some stuff around here. I've got two monitors going, so let me share the correct one here. Okay. Can you see my screen now? The respiratory management? You can. Okay. All right. Okay, so already been discussed what we're going to talk about today. And oops, I went too fast. Computer's really slow. There we go. All right. So we're going to talk about, as you mentioned, three of the primary therapies and the devices that we're using these days in home care, specifically with neuromuscular patients and Nemaline myopathy. It's a different condition than your ALS and your muscular dystrophies for sure, but from a pulmonary management perspective, a lot of it's the same. There are some subtle differences that we can talk about probably more in the Q&A areas. But we're going to talk about ventilators. We're going to talk about IPV and cough assist therapy. And I do want to hear your questions when we have the breaks. Please ask questions, because there's no way I'm going to cover everything that might be of interest to you just off of the top of my head. But, you know, on a very basic level, what is respiration? What happens when we breathe? And this is where the rub comes in with a lot of the clinical community at large. Everybody focuses on oxygen levels and oxygen saturation. It's very important, obviously, that we breathe and take oxygen into our system. And, you know, your lungs basically take that oxygen-rich air in, goes into your vascular system, and that oxygen is then delivered to your body to, you know, for all of your metabolism, all of your bodily functions. But there's a byproduct to that, and that is carbon dioxide. So as that oxygen is burned in metabolism, the major byproduct is carbon dioxide. And carbon dioxide is equally as important, eliminating carbon dioxide, I should say, as taking oxygen in. High levels of carbon dioxide in the blood actually form carbonic acid, and it disrupts your metabolism in many ways. And chronic CO2 retention has a lot of you know, side effects that are clearly undesirable. So your lungs are really a two-way path. You take in oxygen. It's easy to measure oxygen levels with a pulse oximeter on your finger, but there's not an easy way to measure carbon dioxide. There are transcutaneous monitors, there are end-tidal monitors that measure your carbon dioxide and your exhaled breath. A lot of those have shortcomings that, you know, there are a number of reasons that those aren't the most reliable ways to do that. The only real way to measure blood CO2 levels is with an arterial blood gas, which is a very important procedure. Nobody likes them. Nobody likes performing them on patients, and patients certainly don't like to have it done to them, but that is the gold standard. So normal respiration, all body systems are normal. Your brain tells your diaphragm to contract, and it pulls downward and creates negative pressure within your chest, which basically pulls the lungs open. And so that's an active process. Expiration in normal situations is passive. When you change from inhale to exhale, your lungs and your chest cage basically contract passively. Unless you're coughing or forcefully exhaling, something like that, it's a very passive function. So in respiratory management, we talk a lot about minute ventilation. And minute ventilation is basically how many breaths per minute times the size of the breath. And each breath, the size of that breath is called tidal volume. And so you can achieve minute volume in two ways. You can take a lot of really fast, shallow breaths, or you can take a few really deep breaths. From an overall efficiency perspective, the lungs operate at peak efficiency at a relatively slow, we call it normal respiratory rate. In adults, it's anywhere from 12 to 18 breaths a minute. Young children, it's faster, but when you breathe shallow and fast, the lungs do not exchange oxygen and carbon dioxide very well. So when we say in pulmonary management, we want to reduce tachypnea, that means rapid breathing. We want to support people so that they have basically a normal respiratory pattern. Since, you know, most neuromuscular conditions don't have any effect on the lungs or the heart and the cardiac vascular system, maintaining oxygen should be a relatively easy thing. And I know some of the questions that I received in advance address this. when when your diaphragm can't pull deep breaths in, that's what's causing this issue. And to a lesser extent, the muscles in the chest and the shoulders and the neck are also involved in that. And any muscular or neurologic compromise that prevents that from happening leads to the decreased breathing, which then triggers people to do the rapid breathing, which is not where we want to be. Oxygenation is pretty easy in this population. And if your oxygen levels are low, it's a pretty good indication that you're not breathing adequately. You're not breathing deeply enough. And, there may be times when extra supplemental oxygen is needed for patients with these conditions. But generally, that would only be an acute situation if they had an active pneumonia or something like that going on. It's our number one indicator of, okay, we've got shallow breathing going on here. When your oxygen levels fall, and that's different for different age groups and populations, but generally we don't like them below 92% for most folks. That tells us that we need to add respiratory support or encourage deep breathing or provide respiratory support for this population. Providing oxygen, supplemental oxygen, can hide that. Now we don't know. If somebody goes to their doctor and they get nasal cannula oxygen, portable tanks, concentrator in the home, what have you, you're taking away the ability for an easy metric to say, I need to worry about deep breathing. You're artificially masking our number one metric that tells us we need to give you help. So bottom line, use of oxygen should be very closely monitored by somebody familiar with pulmonary management with your specific condition, because it's not a never, but it should be a second line defense. If your oxygen levels are low, we need to figure out how to help you breathe more effectively, which is what this is all about. Before we go into the equipment and the support that we do, good time. Anybody have any questions about that? I'm trying to keep it relatively simple, but if somebody has more advanced questions, by all means. We okay? Okay. A lot of you probably already know this. I may be talking down to some of you. I apologize. I'm trying to keep it as simple as possible, but if you have more advanced questions, ask me. So ventilators, what are they? Why do we use them? And as Jen just said, there's been a lot of advancement, particularly over the last decade, in availability of devices that we use to treat long-term conditions that need respiratory support. The term ventilation or ventilator can be pretty scary. Many of the advancements over the last decade or so have been around simplifying ventilation for the end user, meaning that many of these devices are specifically geared for lay people in the home to use, meaning, that not that they don't need some training and some understanding of the device, but they are specifically designed to be used by people who are not respiratory therapists or nurses or physicians. So, it shouldn't be a scary thing for you. In addition, some of the advancements have really greatly reduced the need for tracheostomy in many patients, not all, but many. The level of support that we can now get using a mask or non-invasive interface, whether it's a full face mask, a nasal mask, we'll touch on mouthpiece ventilation. I don't know that a lot of you use that, or maybe you do, but it's become way more efficient, and the data capturing of these devices really closely monitors, is it actually achieving what the goal is? Using them, if you know anybody with sleep apnea that uses a CPAP or a BiPAP machine, if you're non-invasive, it's basically the same. You're doing the same thing that millions and millions of people do at night, or if you're using it during the day as well. CPAP and BiPAP, those are continuous positive air pressure. That's the hold open a closed airway when somebody's snoring or shallow breathing because of an airway obstruction. BiPAP is a fixed pressure support. We'll talk about that a little bit more here in a minute, but it's non-reactive. It just does what it does. And, for patients that need chronic support, sometimes they need more, sometimes they need less. We'll talk a little bit more about that. But in my opinion, working with neuromuscular patients now for about 24 years, I don't think there's any place for CPAP or BiPAP for this population, but other professionals might disagree with me on that. But it is a different level of support. And it's around that tidal volume that I referenced earlier, which is why I wanted to talk about that. Most of our ventilation modes now, we set what that volume is, what's appropriate for that person, given their age, height, weight, gender, all of that stuff. And that's the difference between a CPAP and a BiPAP. Those are fixed pressures. And if you're getting your volumes, great. If you're not, it doesn't do anything differently, where a ventilator level support actually measures your volumes in and your volumes out and increases and decreases support appropriately in a real-time basis. They don't typically take full control of your breathing unless you become completely apneic for some reason. Then they will step up and they will apply a fair amount of support in that situation. But generally, they're very comfortable based on the fact that they're only giving you exactly what you need in a moment-by-moment basis. They're not giving you too much. They're not giving you too little. There's always some adjustment when you first start with it. For younger patients that are still growing, the settings need to be monitored as they grow and increased accordingly. But it provides real-time monitoring so that you're getting what you need all the time. And even when you look at a single night's sleep, we all breathe more shallow when we go to sleep at night. When you hit REM sleep, it becomes even more shallow, which is important with ventilators because it'll detect that and it'll increase that support so you continue to get what you need as your body changes throughout the sleep cycles. And I think I've kind of already just covered this. BiPAP was the standard of care for many, many years. And a lot of physicians out there still say, oh, this patient needs respiratory support, stick them on a BiPAP. It's becoming more well known that we have non-invasive ventilation now, but it's not fully recognized out there. So this is an opportunity for you all to advocate for yourselves if you find yourselves in that situation, if you end up at a physician practice or a hospital or emergency room and they stick, it's okay to put somebody on a BiPAP when they're in a hospital or in an emergency room because you have clinicians standing around you that can recognize that it's not meeting your needs and they walk over and adjust the machine. But for chronic care at home, when you don't have that respiratory therapist or that bedside nurse or physician monitoring you, that's where the dynamic therapy of a volume targeted ventilator becomes really important. So generally, we're talking about VAPS, which is volume assured pressure support or volume targeted pressure support. It depends on the manufacturer. They use different terms, but we set that expected volume for you, and the devices increase and decrease the amount of pressure support that they give you to ensure that you're getting that volume consistently. That's the big difference. It's a very dynamic therapy. I guess that's pretty much everything there. There are a lot of different ventilators out there in the home care, long-term care world now. Some of you may know that there have been recalls around a few of them over the last couple of years. In fact, the Philips company that made the Trilogy, which was the big burst on the scene ventilator in 2009 that had these features, is now no longer manufactured because they had major issues and recalls. Some of the other older ventilators are just being outpaced by newer technology. In my practice, and I cover 10 states now, the most common devices that we're being asked for are, it used to be Ventec, that's now React Healthcare, but you've probably heard of the Boxen. They have a newer series of V Plus units that don't have all of the features of the Boxen. Frankly, the full Boxen, which is actually what I have here that I'll be showing you in a little bit, has a lot of reliability issues. So they came out with their, I don't want to say simplified, but more focused on ventilation devices. They recently came out with a V plus cough unit that embeds cough therapy in with the ventilator. We'll know more about that as we go through this discussion. That's a new code, unfortunately, and the way this works, and this applies to a couple situations that we'll talk about through this call. When Medicare and PDAC put a code out there for a new device, in the early days, they're the only ones that recognize that code. So it takes a lot of time for your various state Medicaid programs, and I'm talking the United States here. It's probably different in other countries. I'm no expert on that. But it can take a couple of years for these new codes to take hold in a Medicaid program or a Blue Cross or an Aetna or all the private insurance carriers. Not that we can't do it, but just understand that there will be some hurdles to overcome as we start putting VCough units out there. The other unit is the Breos Vivo 45. Specifically, they have a 45 and a 45 LS. I call the LS the light sport. It's very much smaller and more portable than the regular Vivo 45. It functions exactly the same, but it is a smaller, more mobile home care, long-term care, outpatient friendly unit. So here's the React V Plus, and this one in this picture is actually the V cough. You can see on the screen there's a V for ventilation and a C for cough. And it's a really nice feature for somebody who has a hard time coming off of the ventilator. If you're wearing your mask all the time, or if you have a tracheostomy and you're invasively ventilated, it's called touch button cough. You don't have to remove somebody from the ventilator. You hit cough and it just synchronizes with your normal breaths and does cough therapy, which is nice for people who have a hard time coming off of the ventilator. It's also nice from a perspective of getting two therapies in one device. But generally speaking, that's what the V Plus Home, V Plus Pro, and V Plus Cough, they look exactly like the original Boxen. They're the same size. They're a little bit lighter in weight. The original Boxen was, I think it's like 17, almost 18 pounds. These V Plus units are about 11.5 pounds. So significantly lighter than a full Boxen. They have about 9 hours of battery life, give or take. It depends on the demand that the patient has for it. They can do mouthpiece ventilation. They can do high flow nasal therapy, which isn't really commonly used in anybody with neuromuscular conditions, but it can be. It provides the ventilation in the V mode and the cough in the C mode. And we'll talk more about cough assist. I'm sure some people on this call are familiar with it, but that's a later topic. But just know that both of those are embedded in that device. And I've already gotten ahead of myself on this, so coding is new. If you work with your physician and they order that, just recognize that the provider, the home care provider, is going to have to navigate that with your insurance carrier. Some insurances offer prior authorization, some do not. That's where it gets sticky. Your physician may have to write a letter of medical necessity. The provider may have to fight with appeals and denials and things like that. So just be aware that with these newer codes, that there's an uphill battle. I know we work diligently with our insurance carriers to fight for those things as they come out. Voxen was in the same situation. 2017, I think they came out. And I can tell you from a coding perspective, there are still about a dozen Medicaid programs that still don't have Voxen, the full multifunction ventilator, on their formularies. So just be aware of that. So now we have the Breos, the Vivo 45. You can't tell in the picture, but it's significantly smaller. I have them here in the office. We'll be looking at those when we finish up here. And a very lightweight device, 5.3 pounds as opposed to 11 or so. Again, about 6 hours of battery. There's an internal battery that's about 2 hours, and then there's a click-in side battery that gives you another roughly 4 hours. They do have the option for an X-Pack battery, which is a lithium battery that's, I don't know, it weighs about a little over a pound, but it can actually be placed in a carry bag with the ventilator that can give you up to 18 hours. What's nice about the 45 LS is it has an integrated humidifier chamber and a heated wire circuit that can help with rain out. And I know that was one of the questions that I received early about how do we reduce condensation in water in the tubing. Talk more about that when I show you the devices, but that's a nice feature to have that all integrated in there. The integrated heater and heated wire tubing are only FDA approved in the United States for non-invasive use. So if you have a tracheostomy, you can't use that. I think at some point the FDA will approve that, but the manufacturer has to go through a lot of testing with them around that. It can also do high flow therapy, which again, probably not commonly used for this group, and can also do mouthpiece ventilation. I'll be curious to hear about mouthpiece with this group. I wonder if any of you are using that. What does it look like? So it's very small, and it can hang on the back of a wheelchair. They make a carry bag. I've actually got one of these bags here to show you. I call it a turtle shell bag. It's very durable. It protects the device very nicely. And you can, obviously put the ventilator in there while you're using it. React Ventec has a bag, but it's very soft-sided, not very protective of the equipment. And carrying that's a bit more burdensome anyway because it's heavy, but they make a mounting bracket for wheelchairs for that as well. I don't have it in the slide presentation, but it came to my mind looking at this picture that we have here. Both of these manufacturers make power cable systems that can connect them to motorized wheelchairs. So if anybody has a power chair, you can connect the ventilator to that, and those giant batteries in those wheelchairs will run these ventilators for several days, meaning you don't have to worry about portability really at all. The one word of caution is when you're connecting to a DC power source. If your internal batteries are not charged from time to time, they will die because the DC external charging power systems, are not charging systems. They won't charge the internal battery. So if you use one of these, you need to probably every couple of days disconnect it from the wheelchair and plug it in to charge the internal batteries. Here's a look at the integrated humidifier. We'll look at a little bit more of that when I go over to the equipment here in a minute. That also further reduces the footprint on this, meaning if it's on a nightstand or a bedside table or what have you, you don't have to have a separate humidifier, again, only for non-invasive use. Where that goes in the side that's open here on the left, that's where the detachable battery resides and a humidifier bypass adapter that they both have to come out in order to put the water chamber in. Very simple to do, but I'll show you that here in a few minutes. All right. Questions about that stuff?
Hi, this is Tracy Cahoon. How are you?
I'm fine. How are you?
Fine, thanks. We have the Trilogy EVO, and it has a chamber that it goes through, and the humidifier can be heated,
Mhm.
or can heat the water. should we be using special tubing to deal with the heat from the humidifier? I mean, we're only putting it on 1.5 to 2, but when we were just in the hospital for pneumonia, just recovering still, they had special like blue tubing that could deal with the heat. And I don't know if we should be using that at home.
Well, that sort of ties into, I'll show you the Vivo 45, the heated tubing, that hospital tubing, the wires in that are called heated wire tubings. The only thing that's there for is to minimize the condensation
Okay.
in tubing. It prevents water from getting in there. It does maintain a little bit warmer air temperature at the airway. Can I ask, are you dealing with a trach or a mask?
A mask.
Okay. Yeah, so very rarely does anybody use any kind of heated wire with a mask unless it's a very small infant. Most
Okay.
pediatric through adults don't need that, particularly with a mask. A little deeper into respiratory function. Your upper airways, meaning your nose, mouth, oropharynx, are there to provide the vast majority of warming and humidifying the air that goes to your lungs. So when people have tracheostomies, that's a little bit more of an issue because you're bypassing the normal warming and humidifying function of the upper airways.
Okay. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Not that it's not an option, because we'll talk about that one. You know, I'm gonna hopefully I'm gonna be able to switch my camera to the other camera and show you guys some of this stuff a little bit here. What else? Any other questions?
We have a couple questions in the chat. Lynn asked for the V plus. You mentioned it's 9 hours. Is that internal plus external battery?
So the V plus units have a small internal battery that runs for, if I remember correctly, about 1 to 2 hours. And then there are two batteries that click in the side. I'll show you those when we go over and look at the devices. You know, I give you a word of caution around any battery statements from any manufacturer. They publish their battery life based on just standard settings on a test lung that doesn't change respiratory rate. They're also based on condition of the batteries being brand new. You will see a decrease over time as you charge and discharge those batteries. I always recommend that people run their device maybe once a month or every other month, run it on the battery and run it all the way down till you get the battery low alarm, just so you're aware of how long your batteries work based on your volumes and your respiratory rates, because that impacts the duration of the batteries a lot. And so, you know, typically I'm giving you the published utilization standards for these manufacturers. Normally, when I'm actually working with a patient, I cut about 20% of that time off. I don't want people relying on something that's probably not going to be realistic for, you know, beyond the initial phases of the use of the device. So
Yeah,
it's just-
no, I agree. This is Lynn. My daughter is trached and uses her ventilator 24/7. And, you know, we started with the LTV, we moved to the Trilogy, we moved to the Trilogy Evo. Those were all recalled. Now she's using the Astral, which we really like. But she tried the Voxen and just could not tolerate it. And she uses cough all the time. She prefers that to suction. But obviously we still have the Respironics cough assist. We have a couple backups actually as well. We're hoping, you know, to have those forever because it's such a good machine. But we would have loved to have gone to a one, you know, sort of machine because she's out and about all the time. So we rely on battery life heavily. And the Voxen, I mean, we never, even friends of ours that are on the Voxen, like never trust once it got to the internal, like you got to get to a charging station because it just depletes so fast, where that's not really typical with some of the other vents. They have stronger internal life. But I am curious, with the, whatever it was, the VS45 or whatever it was called,
Mhm.
obviously, for those that have trachs and use ventilators 24/7, the idea of having a humidification chamber that would be portable would be a game changer. And it's something that I think we all have just been kind of holding off for, because that just seems like such a simple idea to make plugs less frequent, and the dryness. And but one thing that I noticed on the picture, if you go back when you were showing the chamber with the water, you had
Mhm.
said, and I know this is just for those that use masks right now, well, two questions. Outside of the United States, has this been approved for trach use? And then secondly, if the water chamber right now is where the battery sits, are you only then able to rely on the internal battery instead of an external battery? So that would be concerning for someone who's out and about 15 hours a day.
And for further clarification, I was going to talk about this when I went over to the devices.
Okay, so maybe we wait, but
Well, no, it's fine. This is a good time. The humidifier and the heated wire tubing do not work unless it is plugged into a household outlet.
wow, well, that kind of defeats the
Yeah.
purpose.
Yeah, the heating system in those draw a tremendous amount of power. The batteries could not support that.
Yeah,
So you have to, if you're using the humidifier, I mean, you can leave the water chamber in there and you can leave the heated tubing on it, but it disables the heater functions when they're unplugged. But to your point, yes, you have to remove the bigger battery, and you would be reliant on the internal battery, which again is about 2 hours for a brand new battery. That's not going to get you very far. That's why I try to encourage people to get if somebody's using a power wheelchair, ask your provider to get you the cables, because they plug right into the charging port on the wheelchair, and the batteries or the power use on the ventilator has very little effect on the batteries of a wheelchair. They're so gigantic that it doesn't affect your performance of your wheelchair at all, but it does support all day portability easily for a ventilator.
so potentially in the future, if this particular vent gets the FDA approval for the water chamber for trach care, or for trach users, is there the potential then that you could use the water chamber and draw the power from the wheelchair plug? Like plugging, is that separate? Like,
I don't know about that. I would have to ask the engineers, to be quite honest.
yeah, because I feel like that would be a total game changer for and there's a huge community, obviously, that would benefit from this.
Yeah, I know that I have asked them, not recently, if they were going after FDA clearance for invasive. The last time I talked to them, the answer was no. They were still trying to get something else cleared on another product line, which I recently heard did get cleared. But so maybe they're going to start working on that now. I don't have an answer for you right now on that. And I don't know, you mentioned other countries approving it for invasive use. I don't know the answer to that either, honestly.
Okay, thank you.
There's a few more questions in the chat. I'm going to go a little out of order just because this last question is, I think, relevant to this topic specifically. For the vents that connect to power chair batteries, is that all vents or just certain ones? We have the Trilogy Evo.
Trilogy Evo also makes a cable to connect those to the wheelchair. I think if I remember correctly on the Evo, you have to have your wheelchair provider, they have to install a DC to DC converter, meaning that the wheelchairs run on 24-volt systems, the ventilators run on 12-volt systems. So you have to have a small box, they mount it on the wheelchair, that pulls power equally from both batteries, but reduces it to the 12-volt usage. But that can be done. I mean, I've done that countless times with patients in my world. We have tons of folks out there on, the old Trilogy 100s, the Evos, all of that. The wheelchair companies, they have a code for a DC converter that can make that happen for you. That makes sense.
Yep, that makes sense. Thank you.
And then another question from Indira. I don't know, Indira, if you want to ask this, or I'm happy to just come off mute if you want to chime in. But Indira's daughter, she's been told that the device is a ventilator. She's using the ResMed Stellar 150. What happens in the case of someone who's prone to pneumothorax? Will the BiPAP be adequate for the rest of her life as the settings are fixed? What if VAPS on a ventilator causes pneumothorax?
I'm not terribly familiar with the Stellar. That's in the United States. That's more of an inpatient unit. We don't use it in outpatient care in the United States, but I do believe it has a volume targeting mode. And if it does, it should be fine. And, you know, in terms of risk of pneumothorax, I mean, as long as your volumes and pressures are set at a safe level, you shouldn't be at any risk there. You run into that when somebody tries to put too much pressure, it gets too aggressive for too long. Your lungs can sustain high pressures briefly, but not chronically. And, you know, the other thing with pneumothorax is, you know, usually with neuromuscular folks, that's got something to do with an infection or chronic infections or something that deteriorates the lung tissue. And that was one of the questions that was sent to me in advance that I was going to address, but so we can talk about it here. Somebody asked, you know, are high pressures from cough assist risky for pneumothorax? And the answer to that is generally no, so long as your lungs are healthy. You haven't had numerous infections or any lung surgeries or some other, you know, comorbid condition that puts you at risk. As a general rule, we target cough therapy in adults anyway. The ultimate goal is to get to around 45 centimeters of water pressure, inhale and exhale. We don't always get there, but the reality is it's actually not even all that effective. You know, maybe for an invasive with a trach, you could get away with lower pressures and still have good outcomes. But for people that are using it with a mask or a mouthpiece, you almost have to have higher pressures for that to be an effective therapy. Anything below about 20 or 25 is really just not going to do you a whole lot of good on cough therapy if you're using a mask. You know, that all has to be monitored by your physician. They're the ones that have the ultimate authority to say what is a safe pressure for you and what is not. I've had patients on the old T70s, you know, we can't get them anymore. They don't make them anymore. We can't even get parts for them anymore. My service guys are having to, you know, throw them away these days because we can't get parts now. But I've had patients use 70 and 70 without any real problems, but they're usually pretty big folks. So, but that really needs to be monitored and assessed by your physician who knows all of your conditions. You know, it would be wrong for me to say what is a safe therapeutic pressure or not for you, because I don't have that information.
Thanks, Chris. One more question. Will you be talking about stoma care today?
No, that's not on my agenda.
So we'll hold off on that and maybe we can address that in a future session.
Yeah, you might want to get a wound care nurse. That'd be your best authority. I mean, we do trach care and stuff as respiratory therapists, but you know, I've worked with advanced practitioners through the years. People get granulations on the stoma, and there are different products that you can use to manage that. That would not be my expertise. I would see if you could get somebody from, you know, maybe a nurse practitioner that works at a wound care clinic. That would be the best person to help you really get some in-depth knowledge around that.
Okay, great. Thank you. That's it for the questions in the chat. Are there any other questions before Chris moves on?
All right, let me see if I can move my camera here. I'm going to stop sharing. Well, yeah, I'm going to stop sharing for a minute. Let's see if I can. Is this gonna work? Hey, can you see my table over there? It's kind of a mess. I'm not
Yes.
the most organized person. Hopefully you'll be able to hear me. I'll try to speak up. Let me know if you can still hear me.
We can.
Here, just for reference, if you can see this side by side, these are the differences in the size of the Voxen V plus units versus the Brayos Vivo 45. Is that clear enough? Do I need to try and bring those closer?
It's pretty far away. It's hard to visualize.
Yeah, plug them both here. I'll take all the tubings off of them just so I can carry them over. There's a comparison. Is that good? Can you see better now?
Yes.
So let's talk about the Voxen. We talked about, or the V plus. They have two click-in batteries, one on either side. And that's how you get to your, as they say, 9 hours. Again, as they deplete over time, they will degrade. This is a full-blown Voxen that has a suction port on the side, nebulizer, oxygen concentrator, all of that. Not really something I recommend from this population, just because this one's about 18 pounds versus your Brayos. I don't know, does that help you get a sort of a comparison on size? But everything's touchscreen on these. Glasses off. So when I go to my therapy page, you see I've got vent, oxygen, cough, suction, nebulizer on this device. The newer ones will just have the V and the C, like the picture that I showed you earlier. But everything is here. I've got it in, I've fooled it into a standby mode. They don't actually have a standby mode in these. So when you turn them on, they're always ventilating. I've got a little trick that makes me able to turn them on without them ventilating, but everything's very simple, touch button. If you can operate an iPhone, they always say you can operate one of these. Ugh, that's heavy. So here's your Vivo 45. And this is where you take out your humidifier bypass and your detachable battery. Okay. And then the water chamber goes in to the side. You have to push that in until you hear a click there. I don't know if you heard that, but so now you have this all just in one little footprint. The heated tubing, and you can use regular tubing. You don't have to use the heated tubing, but if you're having rain out issues, that goes on there. And then the heater cable plugs into the back of the device like that. And you can actually feel this when you turn it on and activate it. You can feel that the tubing is warm. I think one of the questions that I had earlier was, how do you manage rain out other than just turning down the humidifier? That was one of the questions sent to me before all of this. A lot of people buy what's called a tubing buddy. It's just a tubing wrap, and it's a cloth wrap that zips up around the tubing to insulate it. The number one thing that causes water and condensation in these tubings is you've got warm, humid air coming out of your humidifier. If you've got fans in your room, or you keep your room pretty cold, or you're in a cold environment anywhere, think about when you breathe on a cold mirror. you know, all that condensation turns into water basically. So if you've got warm, humid air going through the system and cold air blowing on the circuit, that's going to cause you a lot of those rain out issues. And that's what having the integrated heated wire tubing prevents. But if you don't have heated wire tubing, those tubing wraps go a long way to insulating that and preventing that rain out. You want me to turn them on and run them, or do you all get it?
Chris, I have a specific question about the Vivo 45.
Okay.
Is there is there a way to silence the beep when you first turn it on?
No, it always
No.
beeps when you power it up. And every
Okay.
time you plug it in, it powers on too. I always found that to be kind of annoying. I don't like that. This is off now. If I go over there and plug it back in, it'll power up and it'll beep. There is no way to disable that. We can turn the alarm volumes down, but I don't think that affects the power on acknowledgement.
Right. Okay, thanks. I don't know that we really need to see them running.
So then your battery goes back in. This is a humidifier bypass. Obviously, when your water chamber's not in there, the air comes out of here and goes here to the tubing. If you don't have your bypass in there, and again, you have to hear that positively click in. That's what drives the air from the blower unit to the tubing. Pretty simple now. All right.
And I can say just to the audience that we personally do use the Vivo 45, and it is very small and very light, super convenient. The integrated humidifier is fantastic. It's been the best ventilator we've ever used.
I like them. They're very quiet too. The Ventec units have a cooling fan in them, and if you've used an LTV ventilator, I heard somebody say they were on one of those a minute ago. You know, it always has that cooling fan blowing that makes a lot of noise. These have the same functionality as that.
Yeah, it's so quiet that when I'm in the same room near the ventilator, I don't know for sure that it's on.
Oops. Trying to switch my camera back here.
Chris, we have a question. How often should these vents be replaced, or should parts be replaced like the batteries?
So what should be happening is they all have a maintenance schedule. According to the manufacturer, generally speaking, most of them are every 2 years or 10,000 hours. They should come in for a service. They call it preventive maintenance. And then they all have a schedule when a new blower motor gets put in them, but they should be recalibrated or tested for their calibration at some interval. The Vivo 45 actually has a 4-year maintenance schedule on it, but I know for our purposes, they don't expect the batteries to last that long. So my company policy, we're still pulling them in at like 3 years, just a year ahead of what they recommend, just to kind of stay ahead of it. But they all components should be tested according to the individual manufacturer. Like a ResMed, the blower motor in the Astral should be changed at 35,000 hours. I think it's 20,000 hours for the Breos, things like that. Oh, how do you refill the water chamber? I saw that pop up. I meant to show you that. The top just pops off and it's got a rubber gasket around it. They say these are dishwasher safe. You could put them in the dishwasher. I'm not a big fan of that. I think the heat over time is going to make these crack. These are single patient use, but they're not disposable like a regular humidifier. If you're using an MR or Fisher-Paykel humidifier, you're usually throwing the chamber away once a month. These are intended to be semi-permanent. Usually they should last at least a year or two at a time. But yeah, you just pop the lid off. put the water in it, pop the lid back on. Easy to clean, easy to maintain. What else?
Do you recommend distilled water at all times in the chamber?
Always.
Yeah.
You should always use distilled water. If you don't, if you use tap water, it's okay to use tap water, you know, here and there if you need to. But you will see mineral deposits form on the bottom of the chamber. You know, you're basically boiling away the water and you're leaving all the chlorine and magnesium and all that junk. The bottom of your canister will get cruddy really quickly if you're not using distilled water.
And are there any risks to the patient if they're inhaling the mineral content that's found in tap water?
The real risk becomes that scaly stuff can be a harbinger for bacteria. The minerals itself that's not going to be something they end up breathing in, but it gets crusty, and if you don't clean it out, it could get, you know, algae. I've seen algae in them. People don't take care of them. You see a lot of things, you know, but you should, if you're using tap water, I would scrub it every day just to keep the minerals from building up in there. And I would not recommend using CLR or any of those chemicals. That probably is not good for your respiratory system.
And for care and cleaning of the chamber, do you recommend regular dish soap for cleaning it out? Does it also need to be sprayed with a water vinegar solution to disinfect it?
Not really. If you're washing it with warm soapy water, that's usually plenty. Rinse it really well and you should be right back in business. Same thing with the tubing. If you're using, you know, reusable tubing like that heated wire tubing, again, that should last 6 months to a year, if not more, if you're cleaning it regularly. I know we used to recommend vinegar cleaning and things like that. You know, maybe if I was dealing with an invasive with a trach and I was reusing it, I might want to do the vinegar soak. But for non-invasive, I don't think most of my team recommends that anymore. It's more around invasive airway things that we worry about that.
Okay, thank you. And then Alexandra had a follow-up question related to this, and she says, where does the water go? It doesn't look very deep. Alexandra, can you clarify what you mean by that?
There's a max fill line here. I don't know if you can, probably can't see it on camera, but just about halfway is the max fill on there. So you pop the lid off, pour it in. You don't want to overfill it because you run the risk of water getting back into the ventilator itself, which is not good. The baffling on this is really good. It's designed to prevent water from backflowing into the ventilator. You have to like really do all kinds of stuff to get water to roll back into the ventilator. They're very well designed to keep water from, because even a couple of drops of water going into a CPAP, a BiPAP, a ventilator, it doesn't take much to ruin them. You know, the couple drops of water going back into a machine. That was our biggest problem. I know we got an Astral user on here. We've had a ton of those come through for service because people always seem to be getting water in them. They don't have any protection at all on them. But as long as you're careful and leave a filter in front of it, probably okay. But I always tell people, if you're moving your ventilator and you have a attached humidifier, either empty the water out before you move it or disconnect it and put the hose straight on the ventilator. Don't move a vent and a water chamber together because you're just asking for water to go back into the machine. We usually put filters on there to prevent that, but sometimes enough water hits that filter, it'll get through, and that's bad news. What else?
And I can answer Alexandra's question just based on our own experience. She's wondering how long the water lasts because it doesn't look like a very large quantity of water. In our experience, that chamber filled to the max line with humidity at, I don't know, we keep it maybe at 2. My daughter can clarify, she's on here. And that lasts her for all night of sleeping and all day of use. And she does use it for a lot of daytime hours as well, usually between like 15 and sometimes up to 18 hours in a 24-hour period. She's on the ventilator.
They advertise 10 hours from the manufacturer, but again, variability based on how much air is moving through it, what are the ambient conditions, and your heater setting obviously has a lot to do with that. If you turn it up to 5, it's going to run out really quick. What else? We're probably not going to finish in 90 minutes. Is that okay with you all?
That's fine with me.
Yeah.
Anybody who can stay on is welcome to stay.
I think in the interest of time, maybe we can switch to the next topic, but if there are follow-up questions, please put them in the chat and we can circle back if there's anything else to add.
If you don't mind, I'm going to step away for 1 quick minute. I've been drinking too much coffee today.
That's fine.
No problem.
Right
It'll
back.
give us a chance to chat.
And Lucinda, if you want to make any comments about your personal experience with the Vivo, you can just feel free to chime in right now.
Yeah, I did mention in the chat that I actually keep it at 4 to 5, which is the highest. I think 5 is the highest setting of the humidity. And that's why it doesn't always last me all night. But that's like the maximum that you can use. If I keep it at 4, then I'm usually fine all night.
So at 4, you would say that the water will last you for what, 11 hours, 10 hours? But
Yeah, I'm probably saying 10 hours.
10, okay.
Is anybody still using a Trilogy EVO? I'm wondering if we should be pushing to get off of that sooner rather than later.
Tracy, this is Lynn. Oh, sorry, I'm next to my wife and I'm echoing. I would definitely, can you mute me or something? Okay. I would definitely look at, I'm surprised actually that you're still on it, honestly, that they haven't pushed you to get off of it. Like we were pushed, what, 2 years ago? Yeah, like up in New York State, I don't think many people are still on anything Trilogy.
We are currently on the Trilogy
Never heard
100
about it
still.
that very quickly.
Yeah, they
There's a lot of issues with those machines.
we were on the older Trilogy and they switched us to this EVO and gave us the additional filters and stuff. Our home care respiratory DME has not been very good. I'm not sure there are too many that are, but I guess I need to probably talk to our pulmonologist and see if we can get moved. I don't even know the last time they serviced it. And I guess I've been relying on them to, do what they should be doing and making sure it's all good to go. But I'm gonna reach out this week and get that figured out. Thanks.
Yeah,
Just so
Yeah,
you know, there
definitely.
have been some field safety notices around the Trilogy Evo. It's not a recall, but there are some recommendations that we as providers are supposed to be following in terms of there's a new HEPA filter that has to go in the back that has to do with a flow sensor that was in them that was getting contaminated, and alarms related to that. In certain circumstances, probably doesn't apply to this group, but there are certain circumstances where we have to use an additional set of alarms now because there's a software update pending. When they issue that software update, the alarm thing will be taken care of, but there's a very ISO 9000 is a certifying agency. And the Evo alarm response time exceeds ISO recommendations right now. So they're going to issue a software patch to those devices to shorten the time period for that alarm. So, again, it's probably not anybody in this group that's even settings that's relevant to, but it's possible.
Okay. Thanks. Yeah, I think we'll talk to our pulmonologist and see and mention these two that you said the React and the Briaz are like the standard of care now.
That's
Like the
what
gold
most
standard.
people are. Like I work with Dr. Wolf in Chicago. She's like one of the biggest ALS gurus in the country. She is strictly using the V plus React units now going forward.
Okay.
So,
Chris, are you not, like up here, the Astral is sort of the vent of choice it seems like everybody's moving to. Is that not what you're seeing down in the south?
it's everywhere. It's different everywhere in the country.
Okay.
Down here in the south, like Richmond, Virginia, VCU is mandating that all of our new patients are on Breos 45s. Lisa Wolf at Northwestern wants React. We've got St. Louis University, their children's clinic wants all their kids on VCOFs, which is a nightmare for us because Missouri Medicaid won't recognize the VCOF, and they're giving us fits, and the physicians are screaming at us, why aren't you doing it? And we're giving them the denials from the insurance, and they're not having it. So it's it depends on where you are. We still have a lot of folks that are very loyal to the Philips product just because of the wireless monitoring and the platform care orchestrator that they use is so ingrained in their practices. They don't want to let go of that. So, it's a very regional thing. The struggle is real on our end because when this whole thing went down with Philips, it was just a mad scramble to get our hands on anything we could, and it's all over the place. So, all right. So we moving on. I get to share my screen again.
Yes, that would be great. Thank you, Chris.
Okay, am I back up? Oh, no, I didn't hit share, did I? There we go. All right, you back on my screens?
Yes.
Slides? Okay. All right, so next. There we go. IPV. All right, so intrapulmonary percussive ventilation. If you've seen a Byways cough assist device, this probably looks very familiar to you. I have one over there and I'll show you. But so some of you are probably familiar with IPV. It's a positive pressure device. Again, you can use it by mask, mouthpiece, or connected directly to an airway. It generates positive pressure. It'll probably be easier when you see it. I'll run it over here when we get to that point. But it's combined with a nebulizer. So the Byways Clear device actually has if some of you probably have heard the term aerogen nebulizers that you can almost never get in home care because they're mega expensive. The Byways Clear incorporates an aerogen nebulizer, so you're getting an aerosol treatment throughout. You don't have to, but if it's ordered, you can. And it cycles through 3 basically therapy sessions automatically. I'm curious, is anybody on this group using one of the older IPV machines? Let me jump ahead here. I think I have a picture of it. No, I took it out.
Chris, it's a device that's been almost impossible for anyone in our community to get approved. There's one family that I know of, I think she's in New York, who was able to get it approved, kind of going through a back door and jumping a lot of hurdles. I don't know if she joined us today, but it's a product that lots of families could benefit from, and we just can't get it.
Yeah, well, hopefully that changes here in the near future. Is she using the old one that has that phasotron medicine cup and has to dial the pressures by hand and all that?
I believe so. She's had hers for quite a few years now. Yeah.
I've got some kids on that in our Illinois market. They will cover it for certain pediatric patients in there under their Medicaid DSCC program in Illinois. It's a big lift every time, but we do have them out there. But they're sort of what I'm alluding to here, probably more on the next slide, but they're very cumbersome to operate. They require a lot of maintenance. They're very fiddly and finicky, just not a good user experience for caregivers in the home. I guess I took my picture out. I don't know. I modified these slides like 3 times this week. So what does it do? Intrapulmonary percussive would apply or imply. It adds an inflating pressure to the airways, and it basically pulses that air with the intent of doing 2 things: expanding the lungs and loosening secretions to keep the airways clear. By and large, like cough assist, I view this as a preventative therapy. It's something that you should be doing on a regular basis. Once we can get it rolled out, I say the same with cough. You should use it every day, whether you think you need it or not, to keep your lungs open, keep them clear, and not have to use it as a rescue device when you do get pneumonia. You're probably not going to get pneumonia if you're faithful to your therapy. So, this, the slide's kind of wordy. It'll be easy to see when I do the demo here in a few minutes, but lung expansion is also part of it. One of the phases of the therapy is just positive pressure, where you're just breathing through this mouthpiece or mask with basically a high base pressure to help inflate the lungs. If you're familiar with the term atelectasis is, all the alveoli in your lungs, the little grapevine balloons that do all the gas exchange in the lungs. Atelectasis is when those collapse on a microscopic basis. It's not a pneumothorax. Your lung's not collapsing, but little pockets within your lungs, those little alveoli collapse flat instead of being inflated. That's atelectasis. That's really bad. It becomes a den for infection. It makes work of breathing harder. It makes oxygen and CO2 transfer much more difficult or less effective. So the lung expansion component of this, and in addition to the airway clearance and the nebulizer, goes a long way to preventing some of these issues. Let's see. So I already said the older devices are very cumbersome to use. Byway is clear, very user-friendly, probably going to be more effective than the older devices because of, the more modern technology that's in it. Again, new coding. CMS released this in October, I think. And as of today, they're the only insurance company I'm aware of that recognizes it. Although I was on a call Monday with a group of providers in North Carolina, and I heard one of the heavy pediatric focused providers in North Carolina has gotten 1 or 2 authorizations for some small kids on this. So that sounds encouraging that maybe this is going to be adopted fairly quickly, but time will tell. Same as the VCough. If you get an order for it, you're going to have to be patient with your providers. They work through it. They're probably going to need a letter of medical necessity. They're going to have to submit it to the insurance. The insurance is probably going to deny it at first as an unrecognized code. They're going to have to resubmit the claim saying they realize it. Can we bill it as a miscellaneous? And it just becomes this big back and forth. But it's a process that just takes time and patience, and we can work through it. I think, a lot of us in the long-term care world feel very strongly that this is going to be a very valuable therapy, especially for a group like this. I can see it. That one of the questions that came to me early on, do we feel that this is going to be denied if you already have a cough assist? That's a question I asked the Byways people when they were sitting in this very office a couple of months ago. They don't know. The other question is it going to be like cough assist? You can either get a cough assist or a vest if somebody has a vest or a cough assist already, or is insurance going to deny this? They don't know the answer to that right now. They hope not, they think not, because it's really an entirely different mode of therapy. But I know CMS, Medicare, Medicaid services, the two codes for vest and cough assist are both classified as airway clearance devices, and I think this is as well. So it is a possibility we may run into that issue. I just don't know at this point. There's not enough clear guidance as we sit here today. I think I already talked about this. I might be duplicating myself. By oscillating and delivering medication simultaneously, it aids with deposition of the aerosol of the medication in the airways to help open them up better. The lung expansion makes airflow better, and then the oscillation removes any secretions that may be in the airways. I think I took it out as well. I had a fun fact. A lot of people don't realize that your lungs actually have more exposure to the environment than your skin. If you were to lay the average adult's lung tissue out and spread it out flat, all the alveolar surfaces in the airways, it's about the size of a tennis court. So we have more exposure in our lungs to the outside environment than we do to the rest of our body. That's why trying to keep them clean and clear is so important. This treatment's faster. Those older IPV units that your friend in New York has probably takes her 20-25 minutes to do a session on that. This is generally a 10-minute or less therapy. The out-of-the-box programming on it's like 7.5 minutes. It's 2.5 minutes for each of the 3 phases of the treatment. That's obviously adjustable. You can do it longer, shorter. We can adjust pressures, oscillation frequencies, whatever your physician wants, or sometimes they just say set it up and do what works for the patient, and we can give you guys the latitude to make some adjustments or work with you as frontline providers. But generally speaking, you can accomplish the same goals in a lot less time. It does have a battery, so it's portable. I forget the duration, but I'm sure it's out there on their website. If you go to ABM Byways, all their specs are out there for it. I want to say it's enough for 10 sessions. I think that's correct. You might want to fact check me on that. I don't mind. But once it's set up, connect your nebulizer to it, turn it on, very easy. And there's sort of a picture of it there. This one here, one of my educators sent me this slide. This one's showing 4 2.5-minute sessions. That's kind of optional. You can do as much or as little of it as you want. Again, the out of the box starts with oscillation, expansion, and ends with oscillation clearance. Again, the first one is not it can be done, but it's not the standard out of the box program. Very customizable. Here's what it looks like. I don't think there is a problem doing it with a tracheostomy in the home. I do know that the FDA clearance as it is now, when they use this device in the hospital, they can put it in line with a ventilator. That is not cleared for home. So if somebody has a tracheostomy, they need to be able to come off of the ventilator to do this therapy. They're probably going to work on FDA clearance for that in line with a ventilator at some point. I am also going to run some testing when I get time, just to check it against the functionality of our devices to see if it'll play nicely with the various ventilators that we supply. I can't tell you that right now. I have not had time to do that. But it's very simple to use. If you're using a mask, you got to have the ability to hold the mask on the face for the duration of the setup. That may be problematic. I don't think so. Again, mouthpiece you can do. Once it's set up, you hit the play button and you can pause therapy anytime you want during it. But Once you hit play, it runs through all the cycles automatically in turn, and then it just finishes by itself. Questions on that? I do want to show it to you just so you can see it. And full disclosure, I've never done IPV therapy. That didn't exist when I left the hospital 26 years ago. So it hasn't been a thing in home care until just now. So I've learned a lot about it, but I won't call myself any form of an expert just yet. What do you want to know about it? Just want to see it?
Yeah, let's take a look at how it works. Maybe some questions will pop up then.
Let's go ahead and switch cameras again. Ugh. Okay. Oop, I dropped the mouthpiece. So you can see this here. Looks exactly like a bi-waist pop assist as I drop everything off of it. The cable here, this power cable connects. This is your Aerogen nebulizer. So as you're putting your medicine, your aerosol in, it goes straight into the airway. I've got an adapter here for a lung, so I'm going to show you how it works in action, but I'm connecting it to a test lung, but here's your mouthpiece. Any standard cough type mask will fit on that adapter as well. Ah. So I've reprogrammed this just to do all 3 sessions at a minute apiece, or all 3 phases of therapy. But if you want to see, you can do up to 5 different segments. I've got 3 in here. But within each one, I have the nebulizer turned on. You're not going to see the nebulizer because I don't have any medication or liquid in it, but it will be running. And it will just cycle through all of these. I hit play. Maybe I should, let me open this lung up so it gives you a better visual. Do you see what that's doing?
Yes.
That would be also delivering aerosol therapy. And this is going to run for a minute. Normally, this therapy would be for about 2.5 minutes like this. And you see there's a timer going here. I don't know how well you can see that. But as soon as that timer goes around, it's just going to go to lung expansion.
So would this replace vest therapy? Like using,
It could.
okay.
In the perfect world, you'd have both, but
Oh, okay.
no, I don't think you're going to get authorization for both. But I think this is probably at least as effective as vest. So now we've gone to the second. And this is just lung expansion. Keep in mind, my nebulizer's still going. But the patient's just breathing. And it's just putting some positive pressure into the airways. Right?
Does it need to be used with an
Breathing
Airgen
ability.
nebulizer, or can it be used with a more traditional compressor nebulizer? Like our insurance would not approve an Airgen nebulizer.
It's part of this system. If you get approved for this, you get the Aerogen.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, that's the thing that's pretty cool about it. And you can set this up just to run the nebulizer portion, right? You don't have to do all of this stuff. We can set it up to where you can just do a nebulizer treatment with your Aerogen, but you would have to have this Aerogen adapter because it fits into that pipe. but it comes with the system. And there we go, right? So now we're back into our oscillation airway clearance. And that'll run. I'm gonna go ahead and shut it off. And I do have it on battery right now. But yeah, that's a huge advantage to have an Aerogen on there. You know, they use them in every hospital. Pretty much that I know of. You can't get them at home care because they're, I don't know, $1,400 or something like that. They switch
Cece,
around.
as far as Rachel goes, I think she just has the Aerogen, right? She doesn't have that.
No, she does not have the Byways Clear. Byways Clear is a brand new machine.
Yes, okay.
Yeah, what she has is the older version that has been around for a long time.
IPV.
Actually, she
and-
might have IPV.
Philips or
Yeah.
someone makes an IPV machine.
Okay,
The same group that makes the shaky vest makes a home selling IPV.
So the older IPV had a standard kind of nebulizer cup. You know, it has a compressor built into it, so it's a regular old-fashioned kind of aerosol. But then it has this valve system with pressure tubes and all that stuff that come off of it, and there's some kind of a valve that you have to take out of it like monthly or a couple times a month and clean it and lubricate it. And you know, there's a lot of maintenance around that older IPV system that they use at home. All of that goes away with this newer device.
And a lot of our families do have a cough assist machine already. Many would also have the vest. My understanding is to get approval for both of those, they had to wait 5 years. So one or both of those may be, you know, an older device. And we're optimistic that perhaps the Byways Clear might be put into a different category so that our families who have cough assist, vest, or both may be able to get approval for this sooner rather than waiting that 5-year time period.
And nobody has an answer to that yet, unfortunately. I definitely asked the manufacturer when they were here, and they said they feel strongly that it's going to be an additional category, meaning that it won't be limited by vest or cough assist, but they don't know that. I don't think anybody knows that. CMS hasn't written the guidance yet. And, you know, for those of you that were familiar with Vox and Ventec, they had a VC unit years ago. And when CMS came out with the code for the Voxen, it applied to both their full Voxen and the VC, which was just vent cough. And then they later rescinded it for they changed the verbiage. So the original verbiage around multifunction ventilator said it must be a ventilator in at least one of the other 4 functions. And about 1.5 years, 2 years in, they changed the verbiage to say it must be a vent plus all 4 of the other devices. So a bunch of providers had these VC units out there and couldn't bill them anymore. So we had to go out and pick them all up. And, you know, Voxen was gracious, or Ventec was gracious, and basically replaced those with full Voxen units. But, you know, I just keep that in the back of your mind. CMS can change what they authorize, and honestly, all the insurance companies follow suit, if not immediately, very soon after. So it's the federal government that's really dictating coverage guidelines on this stuff, which is really unfortunate.
Does anyone
had a-
have any other questions?
Case with the medical director of CMS one time years ago. Something just happened to my screen. Around some advocacy that I was doing, and I literally was talking to her, and I said, you know, we're asking for this change in DME coverage. Well, I may or may not have the authority to do that, but why would I? And I said, well, because if we can provide this service, it's going to keep people out of the hospital and save Medicare Part A a ton of money. And she literally said to me, "That's not my problem. I have Part B to worry about. Part A is none of my concern." And I was like, wow.
Mhm.
Oh,
Yeah.
dysfunction in our government is quite real.
Mhm.
It's just, I'm trying to figure out what happened to my slide presentation. It went away here.
We, I have a question. We just got a vest last year and we've had a cough assist now since 2019. I had asked, leaving the hospital just the other day, if we should be getting a new cough assist, but between a cough assist or this byways clear, if we can only get approval for one of those, what do you think would be more beneficial to try and pursue?
So yeah, I had this same battle years ago, many years ago, when I first started working with the ALS population. We had a very, I'll call it elegant clinical protocol where our patients would wear their vest and take a nebulizer at the same time for 20 minutes twice a day. And after their vest therapy, they did cough assist. They all got both devices. And so 20 minutes with the vest and the aerosol, everything's opened up, everything's loosened up, follow it with cough therapy. Boom. We never had any pneumonia infections in that population when we did that. And then around 2008 or 2009, whenever the guidelines changed and they made it one or the other, we had to have a serious sit down as a clinical team, and we went to the cough assist, because at the end of the day, in that patient population, and it may be different here, but this is where I'm going, they all lose their ability. It's a progressive disease. They get worse and worse. At some point, they can't cough. So at that point, having a vest to loosen secretions is pointless if you can't cough it out, can't clear it out. So we made the medical determination at that point for that population, since it was one or the other, they all get cough assist now. With this group, I would say it depends on your trajectory. What is your prognosis? Are you having decline? And generally, it's not a decline, right? It is what it is for you all. So if it's somebody that has a reasonably effective cough, the vest might be your go-to. If it's somebody that doesn't have a strong cough or potentially is on a decline, then I would say probably cough assist is probably going to be your go-to if it comes down to a choice of one or the other. You have to discuss that with your physician. Ultimately, I can only tell you my opinion. I'm not a physician. I can't make any real recommendations, but based on extensive background, that's where I fall on that.
Okay, thanks. And then, sorry, I have another question. When they sent us home, they told us to do not a nebulizer, but albuterol, and then the vest, and then cough assist. You've been talking about nebulizer though. Do you think nebulizer would be better than the albuterol?
Well, nebulizer, you put albuterol in the nebulizer, right?
Well, we just put it in this little optic chamber, and then he does like 10 breaths.
Oh, you're doing you're talking about a meter dose albuterol.
Yeah.
Oh. Yeah, I mean, the inhaler in the optic chamber is a great option if he's able to take a good, slow, deep breath. If he can't coordinate a good, slow, deep breath with the activation of the inhaler, the nebulizer is always going to get medication to the airway. The meter dose inhaler does require timing and deep breathing.
Okay.
So, as a respiratory therapist, to me, the nebulizer is always more effective. It's
Okay.
quicker and easier to do an inhaler, but you can put albuterol in the nebulizer or get albuterol in the inhaler. If you have a nebulizer and he's sick, I would use that. If he's not sick and things are fine, I would use the inhaler.
Okay. Thank you.
I'm probably overstepping my bounds here, but
No, this is helpful. Thanks.
So for those families who have a cough assist already and have a vest, let's assume both of those devices are in perfect working condition. They have an opportunity to get a new device because they're past that 5-year threshold. Are you suggesting that they try and get the byways clear? Because that's really the best opportunity to get a new device that does a different therapy on top of what they already can do at home.
Yeah, I mean, again, you probably have to talk to your individual physicians about that. To see if they even feel IPV is appropriate for you. You know, there are some contraindications for it, so I can't just blanket say, yeah, try and get the new therapy. It all depends on your global medical picture, you know, and anything with positive pressure needs to be assessed by a physician. If they agree that that's a good therapy for you, I'd go that route. You know, I mean, there's a lot of data to support IPV. They've been using it in the hospital for years. And it's like a go-to therapy there. When somebody comes in with a bad pneumonia, they slap them on IPV right away. Where there's a lack in data is long-term home care use. But you got to think if it works in the hospital, it works at home. All right, what else? Last section. Okay. And it sounds like a lot of this group already has experience with cough assist. So that's good. All right, is my slide back up? Okay. So there we go. So we've already talked about it. Sounds like a lot of folks already know about it. The cough assist is an airway clearance therapy for people that have weak or ineffective cough. It's been around for a really long time. Although I remember as a young therapist, when the first time I heard about it, the idea was like heresy. For what do you mean you're going to apply negative pressure to somebody's airway? We never do that. You're going to suck the air out of their lungs and it's going to cause all kinds of problems. But that really turns out not to be the truth. It's a very valuable mode of therapy. I do have some patients that have cough assists that only do it for the lung expansion part, sort of like what you have on the byways clear. Meaning they put the mask on and they just do the inhale phase. They put it in manual mode and they only do inhale. Again, we talked about atelectasis and the micro collapse within the lungs. Doing that positive pressure several times a day is an option for people who don't necessarily tolerate the exhale cough side of it. It's intended to be used that way, and it's most effective when you use inhale and exhale. But there are some patients who only use that for lung expansion. Again, it's a preventative therapy. I don't like people that say, oh yeah, I never use it. I'll use it if I get sick. Well, what if you don't get sick for a year or 2 years? Are you going to remember how to use the darn thing when time comes? It's not intended for that. It's a preventative therapy. It's a maintenance therapy. It should be done at least, you know, most of our prescriptions are a minimum of twice a day from just being used to it and using it and being familiar with it at least a couple times a week, just so you know how the thing works when the time comes, if you're going to try and be using it as a backstop. But that's not really the recommendation. Very common for neuromuscular folks to have impaired cough. Couple different reasons about that. Oh, there's my surface area of the lungs. It's at the bottom of this slide. You know, you need to have a forceful cough to clear your airways, right? So we just talked about how much exposure your lungs have to the environment. And if stuff gets in there and you can't cough it out, everybody coughs, clears your throat, whatever, you know, even quote normal people, I'm not sure what that is anymore, but people without any medical conditions, we all cough and clear our airways throughout the day. We yawn to take deep breaths. That's a physiologic mechanism to prevent the atelectasis and do lung expansion. Why we need some of this stuff, because that stuff gets weak when you have issues. It can be applied to the nose and mouth, or a mask, or trach, or a mouthpiece. I didn't put mouthpiece on there, but again, we have people using mouthpiece, same as you saw the picture of the byways clear. So there's 3 phases in every cough cycle, just like there's 3 phases in every breath you take. There's the inhale phase, the exhale phase, and the pause in between breaths. One of the things that I didn't really put in the slide here with the byways clear, that is different than what used to exist on the Respironics T70, is during the pause period between the exhale and the next inhale, you can actually put positive pressure in there. You can set it at 5 or 10 centimeters, whatever you want, so that you do your cough, exhale into it, and you're pausing, but before you get that next breath, it's already applying inflationary pressure to the lungs. That tends to be very helpful for folks that have trachs that are vent dependent 24/7. It tends to be very helpful for small adults and pediatrics. It prevents some airway collapse and some desaturations and things like that can happen. It's a new feature on the byways cough. So it's exactly that. It pushes a big deep breath in, you cough into it, it pulls pressure and airflow out. We're looking for a minimum airflow, just from a qualification standpoint. When you, I'm assuming a lot of folks on this call have seen pulmonary function testing. And when you do that forced vital capacity, if your exhaled flow doesn't hit 270 liters per minute is usually the insurance guideline. If it's below that, that's when we're doing cough assist, because that's what they determine to be an ineffective cough. And then there's the pause. Suitable pressures, we talked about this a little bit. They should be titrated by a clinician who's familiar with the therapy. I mean, if your physician just says titrate it, you want to make sure that whether it's a therapist or a nurse, depending on where in the world you are, that they have some experience with it, so that they understand what's safe, what's not, have some basic understanding of your exact circumstances. And again, we talked about earlier, safe pressures versus effective pressures. For a mask or a mouthpiece patient, the goal is to get to 35 to 45 centimeters of pressure on both inhale and exhale. All right. Where you do have to be careful, maybe on my next slide. No, it's here. So sometimes folks have bulbar dysfunction, and that applies to this group as well, right? We have people that have sort of bulbar issues, right? Weak speech, weak pharyngeal muscles. That's where there does need to be some caution and some examination by a clinician who's familiar with the therapy. My team looks at the device because you can see flows and waveforms. When folks have bulbar effect, meaning the throat and pharyngeal muscles are weak, it is possible, if you set it at high flow and high negative expiratory pressure, you can actually suck the airway closed and prevent the air from even coming out of the lungs. So that requires somebody who's skilled to observe and watch. And at that point, if you're observing that, you have to decrease that expiratory pressure and that expiratory flow. And you just have to get what you can get out of that cough. But you have to be careful with that, because now you're just blowing in a bunch of air and not getting any of it back out. Now you're potentially in a position where you could have some, overexpanded lungs, worst case scenario, pneumothorax, not likely, but possible. So that should be, observed, especially when somebody has bulbar effects. Operation. So you turn it on, you cycle it. It can be manual or automatic. Manual basically means that the patient or the caregiver's hitting the button or turning the switch. I'm going to hit the button and I'm going to hold it and cough. And then I'm going to start coughing and I'm going to hit exhale. And then I'm going to wait. And I'm going to do that all manually. These devices can all be set up to operate that way. The T70 had a little toggle switch on the front of it. The Byways just has touch buttons on the screen for that. I don't know, it's a mixed bag out there. I think most patients use it in automatic mode, meaning it detects, I take my deep breath. When it detects the patient's breathing, then it goes into the inspiratory mode. And as soon as the flow stops and they start exhaling, it automatically reverses and goes into the expiratory cough mode and then pauses. For folks that don't have the ability to trigger it, their airflow is too weak or non-existent. The automatic mode can just be set to default times. I'm going to inhale for 1.5 seconds. I'm going to exhale for 2.2 seconds. I'm going to pause for 1 second, and it'll just cycle as many of those cycles as programmed into it. I generally recommend 3 inhales, 3 exhales, then a pause, and then do 3 more, then a pause, and then do 3 more. 3 sets of 3. Ideally 3 times a day. So that's the way we used to write our prescriptions. 3 sets of 3 times 3 times a day. But, I think a lot of people in reality just use it once to twice a day. But 3 cycles of 3 to me is a good therapy session. Does take time getting used to it and practice. A lot of people feel really uncomfortable with it at first, and we will start people out on lower ineffective pressures in the early days just to get them comfortable, teach them how to synchronize with it, how does it work, and then we build up over the period of a couple of weeks, come out and do a few extra visits, and once they're up and running, then you're good to go. Experiences may be different in different parts of the world on that. I don't know, but that's how we've always done it. It is a cough assist, so that's the last bullet there. It's important if you do have somebody that can still cough, it's important that they synchronize with it and they cough into it so that the device is assisting your intrinsic cough. But if they don't have any cough at all, then you do make do with what the system will do for you. But it is most effective when it's synchronized with the patient. Very simple to use. There's a picture of it. There's a picture of it in action. Most people use it with a mask. I've known some people to do it with a mouthpiece. Not very common. It's probably more effective with a mask. And then again, it can be adapted to a tracheostomy tube as well. So I guess that's it. Last slide. So what questions do you have? I think I saw a question pop up on there about this.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Stacy.
Oh, okay. One question is, how often should the settings be reviewed and changed for a patient?
Well, probably at least annually by the physician, or maybe the RT in the home. I don't know that you really have to do that on a regular basis. I think once it's established, but I would say probably my recommendation there is if you have any significant change in condition. Have you gained a lot of weight? Have you lost a lot of weight? Have you gotten weaker? What is it? Do they do regular PFTs in this population?
It is recommended to do regular PFTs. I don't know that everybody does them annually, for example.
For me, that would be my guidance. If I saw a significant change in my pulmonary function testing, I would say, okay. If my peak flows got dramatically lower, or my vital capacity, my lung volumes got dramatically lower, or if they improve for whatever reason, I would say that that would be a trigger to reevaluate. Maybe we should, see if I need more or less pressure. Or just in general, if you notice, I haven't had pneumonia in 5 years, and now I've gotten it twice in 6 months. Wonder if my cough assist needs to be adjusted, or even just one time. If you historically haven't had bronchitis or pneumonia for 5 years, and now all of a sudden you get it, anything like that that's a change would trigger me to think, okay, why did that happen? Am I not getting effective therapy from my cough assist? And that could, in theory, be a function of change in patient condition. It could be a function of the fact that the thing's 5 years old and it might be getting worn out. Well, I mean, it's very possible. T70s in particular, if you're not vigilant about keeping a clean filter on those, on between the tubing and the patient, or any filter at all, if any liquid gets inside of those, the cough valves fail very significantly. Super critical to have a filter on every respiratory device, but particularly a cough device, because it goes negative. It draws air back into itself. If there's anything in that air path that isn't caught by a filter, it's going to wreck that machine.
Would the patient be able to readily tell if their machine was not functioning optimally?
Well, what I would do is test it, put it in manual mode if you can. And if your pressure's set at 35, put your thumb over the end of that tubing and put it at 35 and see if it gets there. That's the way we test them in the warehouse. Really in the warehouse, we turn them all the way up as high as they go, and we actuate them, and we look at the pressure gauge and see, is it getting to the maximum pressure or not? If it doesn't get at least really close to the maximum pressure, they go in for service. So if you're at 35 and you're cycling that thing and you're only seeing it get, now you can't do that while it's on a mask or something, because the leaks could be, and that's why you block it with your hand or your thumb. But if you block that tubing completely and you cycle that and it's set at 35 and it only goes to 25, got a problem. Something's leaking, a hose came loose inside the machine, the blower motor's failing, the valves got moisture in them and they're not closing all the way, it could be a couple different things. So, doing that sort of patient test would be your best bet, because you're not going to know if it's the patient changing. I always refer to the insidious creep of illness. It happens to you and you don't even know that it's happening. It happens over time. And, with ALS in particular, I've always said this, I get people coming in for their first meeting and they're like, yeah, I feel fine. My energy's okay. I'm sleeping okay. And then we put them on, a ventilator at night. They're like, I don't need that. I'm fine. And then we see them a week, 2 weeks, a month later. And they're like, oh my God, I feel so much better. I didn't even realize how bad I felt. Right. Sometimes it takes feeling good to realize that you weren't feeling good.
Mm-hmm.
So you can't rely on that.
Mm-hmm. What would be the risk of an eardrum tear while using the cough assist machine?
I've heard of that one time in 20 plus years. And I'm not certain it was a result of the therapy. I think something else happened to that patient, but anything's possible, but that's out of literally thousands of people I've seen doing cough assist, I've experienced it one time.
And then we have another question. I'm just going to read it. Does the Byways device have only an oscillating mode? First question.
For the clear or the cough assist, you can turn it off on the cough assist if that answers. You can either have oscillation on or off.
That answers it. Yes, thank you.
And then Kate, do you want to ask the second part of your question?
Yeah, I think we had heard that the Byways has like a set number of cycles. Like her doctor will, for example, my daughter's doctor will prescribe 5 cycles in out pause 5 times. The reality is she's gonna tell us when she's done with it. So does the byways allow you to continue to do as many cycles as the user needs, or does it have a set off and restart?
I think we can set it from anywhere from 1 to 10. We can look at it. I got one over here on the table. We're gonna look at it in a few minutes. I think you can set it for 1 to 10, but to your point, if it's set at 3 and you want 10 or 9, just keep restarting it. You know, or you can start it and stop it anytime you want. If it's set at 10 and you only want 3, do your 3 inhale exhales and hit pause and stop it. But you know, from a default perspective, it can be set anywhere from 1 to 10 cycles per, I guess I'll call it session. Every time you hit the play button, you can do 1 inhale, exhale, up 2, all the way up to 10.
And then how high, what's the highest pressure it goes to?
I think it goes to plus and minus 70, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay. We're very, we have heard from folks that the byways is very different and not as good as the cough assist. That might just be because it feels different from the cough assist. And so we're very interested in how these compare and what the byways user experience would be like compared to the cough assist, the Philips cough assist, or whoever makes a cough assist.
Yeah, well, you know, Philips, again, there's some Philips devices out there, but they don't make them anymore, not in the United States anyway.
Oh yeah, I know, we're stockpiling them.
I haven't heard I've heard a couple of patients say they didn't like the byways better. For the most part, I think the majority of our folks have been neutral on it. Anything's going to feel different. You put a Breos 45 ventilator on, and then you change it and you put a ResMed Astral ventilator on, they feel different. They work differently. They naturally do. But if they're both achieving the same pressure, they're doing the same thing. It's just the flow patterns are different. The triggering's a little bit different. And, you know, at the end of the day, the therapy is going to be the same. You know, respiratory is all about, you know, that's the tricky part. You know, when I teach young therapists, I tell them, I said, well, you came out of school, you got all the science now. Now you got to figure out the art part of it, right? There are a lot of adjustments that we make as respiratory therapists. You know, it's like going to the eye doctor. Do you like setting A or setting B better? Only it's that times about 10. There's, you know, when you're and people aren't going to tolerate respiratory support if it's not comfortable. So there's a lot of art in that stuff. And the byways clear is going to feel different than the T70. There aren't as many things to adjust for patient comfort on a cough device as there are on a ventilator, but there are a few things, you know, flow patterns, turning oscillation on or off. You can, you know, with the byways, you can turn oscillation on inhale only, exhale only, pause only, or any combination of the 3. I think with Philips, it's oscillations either on or off, but you know, both good devices. I don't have a preference myself, but I don't have to use one. You know, it's not fair for me to say that.
We were just in the hospital, so we used the byways when we were there, but at home we have the T70. And Mason at first really didn't like the byways. It seemed like it was giving him more pressure. And again, ours is 5+ years old, and I don't think our respiratory company has told us they need to service it, and stupid me for not thinking that we need to be checking that. But the oscillation thing, he definitely did not like. Once we took that part off, he seemed like fine with it. It didn't seem like he was complaining. Like, it felt really different than his one at home after the oscillation mode was turned off.
Yeah,
Just
people
for-
either like it or they don't.
Yeah.
Or there's no real clear data that says oscillation really makes a difference. Everybody offers it, but I have yet to see a clinical trial that demonstrates any real difference in having oscillation on or oscillation off. Now, you know, to your thing about maintenance, there is no maintenance schedule on a cough assist like there is on a ventilator. That only exists on ventilators because they're technically classified as a class A medical device, meaning life-sustaining. cough assist, nebulizers, none of that stuff is deemed that way by the FDA. So there's no required maintenance schedule on those types of devices. But you can check them.
Okay. Yeah, I'm gonna do that test that you just explained to see how we're looking.
Definitely worth doing.
You had mentioned earlier that some people like to use a cough assist device just on the insufflation mode as a therapy to expand the lungs. Would that be very similar to just using their regular ventilator on a different setting? So for example, we have what we call the exercise mode on the Vivo, and we can go to that mode and it provides a larger volume of air, bigger pressure, quicker respiratory rate, because that's what we use when she's actively doing something that's, exercise. So would that be similar to using the cough assist on just insufflation?
No, not really, because that's a real ventilation mode. What you could compare that with, and I touched on it earlier and I never circled back to it, so I'm glad you mentioned that. Does anybody on this call use mouthpiece ventilation on their ventilator? Have you ever seen that?
We have tried using it, but my daughter has a lot of bulbar muscle weakness and can't ever get a good seal around a mouthpiece. So it's just not been effective.
That's a very limiting factor, but I would equate doing just inspiratory phase on a cough assist more like mouthpiece ventilation. For people that aren't familiar with it, we can turn the ventilator to a setting of support where usually we set it with very big breath volumes. Like for an adult that's on a 400 or 500 cc tidal volume, we set it to like 1200 cc's. And what it is that you just have like the tubing comes off the ventilator and you have a mouthpiece, and it doesn't do anything until you reach over, bite down on it, seal your lips, and take a breath. And it pushes this big volume of air into your lungs. The reason we set it big is because it's there to do a big inflation support of the lungs. And really, if somebody has a cough assist and they're only using it for that purpose and they have a ventilator, we should probably just remove the cough assist and let them do it through the ventilator. But again, we set big volumes because once they get what they need and they feel the pressure is enough, they just let it, you just vent it, you pull the mouthpiece out. You don't have to actually take the whole 1200, 1400 cc volume, but you can get as much as you like and can tolerate that way. And we have a lot of folks that do that. I've had ALS patients and muscular dystrophy patients, again, different category here. They were fully dependent on the ventilator 24/7. They put a mask on when they sleep and they live off of that mouthpiece all day long. They can't breathe at all without it, but they can trigger a breath from it. We put a stand, we mount it on, if they're in a wheelchair, we mount a stand on the wheelchair so that the mouthpiece is there. And they go about their business and they live off of that mouthpiece all day long. It helps them speak louder, say longer sentences. They get big breaths when they want them. They vent off what they don't, but it leaves them in full control of their ventilation that way. Very useful for certain folks. And it's great for lung expansion. And I would equate that more to the cough assist, just using the inspiratory phase only. It's doing the same thing, just cough assist is pressure driven. Mouthpiece can be pressure driven, but we usually use a volume, a set volume.
Thank you for that.
But point, if you have bulbar, if you can't make a tight seal with your mouth, that's not an option for you.
It also seemed like the Vivo 45 had an alarm that would continuously go off because it was something about it was sensing a pressure problem when we put it in the mouthpiece mode. And so it was alarming.
Has that been a while?
Yes, that was when we first got the machine and we were testing that. We couldn't get the alarm to turn off, and so we haven't tried again.
Yeah, we've had several software updates on those around some conditions like that. So if you've got the current software, that probably wouldn't happen anymore.
Okay. And we also haven't tried it lately because like I said, it just hadn't been an effective, worthwhile thing to do because of the difficulty with getting a good seal.
It wouldn't work out if you can't get a good seal. That's the big challenge. And that's really heartbreaking for the people with the progressive conditions, because again, ALS, they lose everything eventually. And they love to go by about their business all day with mouthpiece, but then they get to a point where they can't do it anymore. And it's heartbreaking, really.
And for a portion of our population, they are born with that level of severe impairment. So in Nemaline myopathy, we don't see that decline that you see in ALS and muscular dystrophies. But the starting point, the best that they ever had to work with can be that end stage disease of ALS or other dystrophies.
Yeah. You got to figure out your plan quickly and go with it, and that's your deal. Some of the effects are the same, but the progression of the path is very different with Nemaline. So it's been interesting. I've learned quite a bit about it here over the last couple of weeks. I haven't dug in quite as much as I had hoped to. I've had a lot of travel lately and things like that, but I'm all about learning new stuff. I've been a clinician for 35 years. If I don't learn something new every couple of days, I feel like I'm a slug.
That's right. We're always learning.
No, learn or die. All right, what else do we have?
Lynette has a question in here. I can just read what she says. Your recommendation for a new vent, if on LTV 20 years, did not tolerate trilogy and seems to always need 2-piece circuits.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to tell you a little story. The guy that invented the boxen at Ventec, it's a guy named Doug DeVries. He's a biomedical engineer. Interesting character. The reason that he invented boxen was because his father ended up with ALS and ended up passing away. And the reason his father passed away very quickly because he refused to, quote, have my house look like an ICU. I'm not having all of this equipment. You don't want a vent, a cough assist, and a suction. You want all this stuff in his house. So when Doug's father passed away, that was the beginning of the boxen multifunction ventilator. And he set about the business of how do I make a device that has all of this in one box, which, again, very valiant effort, but it's from a physics standpoint, it's asking too much out of too little, but, that was the reason for that. But Doug had invented several ventilators before. You want to take a guess what his first big ventilator was? It was the LTV. He was the inventor of the LTV. And so the V+ units to this day still use Doug DeVries' engineering mind. They ventilate. Now, in the case of coming off an LTV, you would need a V+ Pro, not a V+ Home. The reason being is the V+ Pro has the ability to use an active circuit. Most of us use passive circuits, meaning there's a leak in the mask or a whisper swivel or whatever. An active circuit actually has a valve that opens and closes when the patient breathes in and breathes out. So the V+ Pro has the ability to use that active valve type circuit. And when you use that machine with that circuit, it's almost identical to an LTV ventilator. So that's an outstanding question. If you're trying to get on something new, which I think you should, the LTVs were fantastic. I sent one of the first kids in the country home on one of those LTV. It was the 800 or 700 way back then. We thought that was the greatest thing that ever hit the planet. But 30 years later, not so much. There's better options out there. But it ventilates in a very particular way, and a lot of people have trouble coming off of LTVs. I still have a couple hundred of them across our footprint. You know, I'm in 10 states, so we still have quite a few people on LTVs for that very reason. They don't tolerate anything else, but we're slowly managing to get them migrated to B+ pros.
That's a great tip. Thank you for the question, Lynette. Anybody else have something that they would like to know more about, a question?
Do you have a preference or do you have a favorite between the React V Plus and the Breeze Vivo?
If it was me, probably I would use the Vivo just because it's so much quieter and so much smaller. I think the push buttons on it are a little more intuitive. Not intuitive. Yeah, maybe intuitive. I think it's just a little bit more modern. And again, going back to Doug DeVries and the V+ units and all of that, they've got this very robust blower in there that can be pretty forceful at times. I think a lot of people who are used to a Trilogy or an Astral or anything in a passive circuit, they struggle to use a Boxen or a V+ unit.
Okay.
But it's a very durable, very solid ventilator. It's just bigger, it's heavier, it's louder.
What do you need?
And most people, once they're used to it, they're used to it. For the people that are on LTVs, they don't even hear that blower anymore. But
Okay.
I can walk down a hall in a hospital and say, oh, somebody's on an LTV somewhere in this area. You know, you can hear those things, but you know, if it's there all the time, it just isn't an issue.
And Stace, you said that Lucinda uses the Breeze and you really like that a lot too.
Yes, yes,
Okay.
it's been the best ventilator we've used so far. We've used 3 different ventilators at home.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you both.
Sure. Anyone else have a question?
It is like wearing shoes to some extent. You might have to find out if it's comfortable. I mean, that's a big thing, right? They all
Yeah.
work differently and everybody feels differently on them.
He's been very particular about his air and the pressures. He also has Chiari malformation. So with him, with the pressure, when we have any pressure changes, he's very sensitive to that. And we have to kind of, you know, balance that with his neurologist to make sure that we're not adding too much pressure and causing issues with this Chiari.
You said he's on a Evo?
Yeah, he's on the Evo right now, but
Is he ever on a Trilogy 100?
he was on the Trilogy before that. The other Trilogy before that, that was recalled, and then they replaced it with this one, and they said this one's okay for now. But I'm gonna
When he made that transition from the Trilogy 100 to the Evo, did you have problems?
I don't recall anything specific. I think maybe for a little bit, he said the air felt a little bit different, and I know for sure he had a sleep study and they tried changing some of his settings, and after that we were getting a bunch of headaches and having issues with the pressure, so we had to back off some of those changes.
We
But
found in clinical practice when we were taking people off of Trilogy 100s and putting them on Evos that we had to decrease their tidal volumes by about 5 to 10% to keep the pressures the same.
Oh, okay.
So it was a more forceful delivery of the air for some reason.
Do you think is there like a kind of similar ratio we should think through if we go to the Vivo from the EVO or no?
I haven't heard of any similar issues to that.
Okay, okay. Thank you.
Sure.
Other questions?
This has just been so great. Thank you guys so much for organizing it. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. And we are just thrilled to have Chris here with us, just a true expert in this patient population and with all of these devices. We're just really so honored to have Chris here today.
Well, it's, this is the stuff that I enjoy doing. I do, like everybody, I have a job that I don't necessarily enjoy a lot of the time, but when I get to actually talk to people and help people and educate them, that's my wheelhouse. I don't mind it at all compared to a lot of the other stuff that I have to do these days. This is the good part. So I'm grateful for the time to talk to you all.
Well, thank you, Chris. This has been invaluable, I think, to all of us, and
Send you the slides,
great.
Yeah.
Yeah, we would love to share those with everybody that was attending today and beyond. And thank you to everyone who attended. Your questions, your contributions were so important, so helpful, hopefully to each of you and to the broader community. So just can't thank you all enough. And Chris, you're amazing.
I don't know.
So thank you for taking over 2 hours today to talk about this. This is just incredibly helpful.
Yeah, I thought it was a tall order to get all three of these in 90 minutes. It's all
I
right.
have one more question or a thought. Do you think there would be value in seeing if any of our pulmonologists that are caring for the NM groups to get together and do like through AFBS, try and do kind of a session for the caregivers? I mean, not the caregivers, but the providers, so they can kind of talk and collaborate. Is that something that AFBS might be, or Chris, do you think certain, providers would be open to that or interested in that?
I know some of the ones I work with would. I can't speak to the neurology community at large, but
Yeah. I just know that, we're in Cleveland and there's a big market in Cleveland, healthcare market, but even for us, we run into often providers that have never seen an NM patient. So it would be nice if there was a way to kind of offer up or see if we could coordinate with some other, providers across the nation that are dealing with NM patients so they could collaborate together.
I would guess they have some sort of discussion group amongst themselves. Maybe not, but
It's a great suggestion. It's a great suggestion, and we'll have to get a better understanding of that collaborativeness within the community, within the pulmonologist community, and whether that's at a conference or something that is kind of grassroots where, they're identified and pulled together for, like I say, a training. We'll have to explore it more and figure out, it's a tricky
Yeah.
setup. So just trying to identify the right people and as many people as possible and bringing in the right players. But it's a good idea. So we'll definitely start thinking about exploring how to do it.
Okay,
And
thanks.
if possible. Yeah. And we love suggestions like that. So if you see any other opportunities, even beyond respiratory care, where AFBS can be valuable in contributing to better trainings or better resources for NM care, please reach out to us because that's what we want to do, is bring more resources to you all. So thank you for that suggestion, and just keep it in mind moving forward. And I'll just, again, thank you, Chris, for everything. That was wonderful. And Stacy, thank you too for your help in identifying Chris and bringing him into the fold. And if there's nothing else, then I think we can wrap this up. And thanks again, and have a great rest of your weekend.
everybody take care.
Thank you. You too.
Thanks.
Have a great
Bye.
weekend.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.